El ex ministro de Defensa canadiense ha afirmado públicamente que los legendarios Illuminati son reales y secretamente manejan asuntos mundiales desde detrás de las cortinas. Como una de las teorías de conspiración más grandes del mundo, los Illuminati son una élite global secreta que dirige a los gobiernos en la sombra y están planeando introducir un nuevo orden mundial en todo el planeta. Aparte de estas repetidas afirmaciones de los teóricos de la conspiración que se han multiplicado en número desde el crecimiento de Internet, se cree que Paul Hellyer, ex ministro de Defensa de Canadá, es el ex político de más alto rango que salió como creyente de la teoría de esta conspiración popular. Dijo que los Illuminati, al menos en su concepto más básico, eran reales y poderosos. Dijo también que los líderes ocultos corruptos siguen librando guerras innecesarias y se centran en las ganancias en lugar de detener el cambio climático. Hellyer afirma que la tecnología para revertir el cambio climático se ha desarrollado, pero es suprimida por los Illuminati, ya que la mayoría de sus miembros clave tienen grandes intereses en la industria de los combustibles fósiles y desean continuarlo durante el mayor tiempo posible. Él dijo:
Usted tiene un grupo secreto que en realidad está al mando del mundo. Y han logrado mantener esta tecnología en secreto hasta que puedan cobrar los trillones de activos petroleros que tienen. Y no va a cambiar hasta que cientos de miles de personas se unan y digan, miren que deben aclararnos, cuéntenos qué está pasando, y cambien sus prioridades para salvar al mundo durante más generaciones en lugar de seguir generando guerras.
El señor Hellyer se une a las filas del mundial famoso teórico de la conspiración David Icke, el exfutbolista y presentador de la gran tribuna BBC 1, que salió como el llamado Truther en la década de los 90. Él describe a los Illuminati como un grupo y la mano oculta en conferencias en todo el mundo. Vale la pena saber que también el ex político afirma que varias especies de alienígenas inteligentes viven secretamente en la Tierra y los líderes mundiales nos lo ocultan. De hecho, afirma que son extraterrestres los que han desarrollado una fuente de energía limpia y gratuita que nos ha sido otorgada y que puede revertir el cambio climático. Él agregó:
Aprendí mucho tiempo atrás que los Estados Unidos, en cooperación con visitantes de otros planetas, habían desarrollado una forma exótica de energía que nos permitiría hacer el cambio de combustibles fósiles a energía exótica y limpia, dentro de 10 años, pero no se está haciendo nada al respecto. Ciertamente se está más avanzado en agricultura y medicina y en muchas otras áreas. Ellos van a mantener esta tecnología en secreto hasta que puedan cobrar los trillones de activos petroleros que tienen.
My name, as I said, was Paul Hellyer. I'm a former Minister of National Defense for Canada. I served in 3 governments during a total of 23 and a half years as a Member of Parliament. Although as Minister of National Defense, I had sighting reports of UFOs. I was too busy to be concerned about them at the time because I was trying to unify the Army, Navy, and Air Force into a single Canadian Defence Force. And that itself was a kind of battle to the finish. So this was not high on my agenda. But about 10 years ago, I started getting interested due to a young man from Ottawa sending me material on the subject. I told him I was too busy to read it, but he had confidence that someday I would. He sent me a copy of Colonel Corso's book, The Day After Roswell. It took me a while to get around to reading it, but I took it for my summer reading in 2005 and was really impressed with what was contained in it. And what I thought to myself is there are huge issues here, huge issues. And the American people and the people of the world have a right to know what's going on because they're part of it. It's not just an isolated thing. And so after confirming the contents of the book with a retired United States Air Force general. I accept the invitation of Victor Vigiani, who's over here somewhere, and his cohort, Mike Bird, to speak to a symposium at the University of Toronto. And I said, UFOs are as real as the airplanes flying overhead. That gave me the dubious distinction of being the first person of cabinet rank in the G8 group of countries to say so unequivocally. Since then, I've learned a lot from many sources, including a number of the fantastic witnesses that we have heard these last 4 days. They were so outstanding, I was just really blown away with them, the amount of information that was available. And I appreciate every single one of them. But because I'm not a ufologist, I'm a politician, there are only a few things that I want to add in that particular realm. First is that about in the 1960s sometime, it was a flotilla of UFOs headed south that crossed into NATO territory in Europe. And the Commander-in-Chief of the Supreme Allied Headquarters in Europe was naturally very shaken. Fortunately, or maybe divine providence, before the panic button was pushed, the flotilla turned around and headed back north. Obviously, they had thought maybe they were Russian, and they were very concerned about it. Anyway, an investigation was launched into this whole subject, and a document was prepared which concluded that at least 4 species had been visiting Earth for thousands of years. And this is my own view at this stage as well. So, except for that, there are just a couple of things that we've talked about that I'd like to refer to. And one was that we were referring to them as they until this morning when Linda Moulton Howe, I think she was the first one, actually named 3 different species. I have brought my latest book called Light at the End of the Tunnel, A Survival Plan for the Human Species, as an aide-memoir, and I name 5 different species here. I'm aware of more now. As a matter of fact, I saw a document just a few days ago that mentioned 20. And I think you, Mr. Chairman, were interested in some of the places they might come from. And I have in here Zeta Reticuli, R-E-T-I-C-U-L-I, Reticuli, the Pleiades, Orion, Andromeda, and the Altair star systems. So I don't think we can any more refer to them as they, because they're not an amorphous mass. They are different species and consequently may have different agendas. I don't think we can say that they all have the same agenda any more than we could say that the United States, China, and Russia had the same agenda. Our real interests may be very similar, but as of now, our perceived interests are still quite far apart. One more observation before I begin what I want to say, and that is that we spent quite a bit of time talking about the 66-year-old cadavers. And I was glad to have Linda this morning finally say that there are live ETs on Earth at this present time, and at least 2 of them probably working with the United States government. The other species that I learned about not too long ago was called the tall whites. And this is when Paula Harris broke the story just a few years ago. And through her good offices, I had the chance to talk for about 3 hours with former Airman Charles Hall and listen to this absolutely fascinating story of how he was working with, first of all, he was scared out of his skin But after that, when he got to know them, how he was working with, and finally they became to trust each other and have a good working relationship with the tall whites at the gunnery range at Indian Springs in Nevada. And these tall whites were living on United States Air Force property and working in cooperation with the United States Air Force and sharing technology with them. He wrote a book, incidentally, called Millennial Hospitality. There are 4 different versions, but Paula says that Millennial Hospitality number 2 is the best. I think that's the one I read, and it's a very interesting read if you want to sort of get inside the problem of what it's like to bump into these people floating across the terrain in the desert. Well, enough on that for now. My interest is in full disclosure. And my only caveat is I think probably I would say 95 to 98% full disclosure. I know of 1 or 2 things that I'm not sure should be in the public domain, at least yet. They will be someday, I'm sure, but not maybe immediately. But just as children survive the idea of the tooth fairy and Santa Claus when they become adult, I think that tax-paying citizens are quite capable of accepting the new and broader reality that we live in a cosmos teeming with life of various sorts. The fact that some other civilizations are more advanced than we are may be humbling, but that could be a necessary step in our survival.
In 1940, the Council on Foreign Relations in Washington, D.C. decided that that Hitler was going to lose the war and that they should start preparing for the next empire, an American empire. And it was to comprise all of the area that Hitler had coveted, including the United Kingdom, all of North America, New Zealand, Australia, and much of the Southeast Pacific Rim. And they've been working at it ever since. They have linked forces with other organizations since, including the Bilderbergers, a post-war organization in Europe, which is the most secretive and one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful organization in the world today. And then the third, the Trilateral Commission, which was formed after Japan began its ascendancy. And these 3 have been working together, and I call them in my books the 3 sisters. They are the sort of the root of what I now call cabal, and other people call it the cabal as well. The cabal comprises the banking cartel, the oil cartel, the big transnational corporations, the intelligence agencies, many of them, but including the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, and a couple of foreign ones, the MI6 from the UK and the Mossad from Israel, and a huge slice of the American military. And they are the cabal, and they have been running the United States for the last half century to the point where presidents have been little more than talking heads, and the Congress hasn't had a clue as to what was going on. After World War II, there was an operation called Operation Paperclip, which was approved by President Truman to bring Nazi scientists to the United States to help, presumably in the Cold War that would ensue. President Truman agreed on the condition that none of the scientists were to have been active members of the Nazi Party. The armed forces who were doing the invitation, the Army in particular, paid no attention to the president. As a former Minister of National Defense, I know how that works. And they recruited the ones they wanted. They gave them new names, new histories, and high-ranking jobs in the United States in the military and civil establishments. They were working on missiles and new weapon systems of various kinds. Well, then after the two crashes at Roswell, two UFO crashes at Roswell on July the 4th, 1947, one of the machines was sufficiently intact to be recovered, and they began back engineering that. Before long, they moved the operation to Nevada. And the president then was Eisenhower, and he wanted to know what they were doing out there, and they wouldn't tell him. So he threatened to send in the First Army from Colorado. And they capitulated and allowed him to send 4 trusted members of the CIA to visit Colorado and see what was going on. Well, what was going on was exactly what they really expected, and that is the back engineering of one of the vehicles from the Roswell area. I don't think there's been a president since, well, actually Truman, who has really been in the loop totally. President Eisenhower vented his frustration in his final speech to the American people at the time he was retiring from public life. He said, "Beware of the military-industrial complex." And the problem is we have paid no attention to him. An eyewitness who had worked in the company of President Eisenhower said what he was really concerned about was that the ET file had fallen into the wrong hands. And that's what he was really concerned about, and I wish he had said it. But that's, I guess, when the cover-up really got underway in earnest. Well, a lot of water has gone under the bridge since then. This cabal, their end game, is a world government. They're calling it the New World Order, which is unelected and accountable only to them. That's what they're doing. And they're well on the road to do it. And you know, they were smart. They said, we won't do what Hitler did and try to take over all this world, these countries, by military means. We will do it by using our brains and using the monetary system to crush the various countries to the point where the people will be glad to accept a military government. And we will use trade agreements, which are not really trade agreements, but which are, in effect, transfers of power from the people, the elected people, to the banking cartel and the transnational corporations. And they put a thing in the trade agreements, which is called the dispute settlement mechanism. And it actually works this way, that if any government, like a provincial government in Canada or a state government in the United States, does something that affects the profits or potential profits of a foreign company, they can sue the government of Canada for lost profits or even lost potential profits, can you believe? they have more rights in Canada than Canadian citizens. And of course, it works the same way with the United States. It's wrong in principle. Two final words. The reason they don't want us to know what they're doing is because if too many of us knew what they were doing, they might not be able to get away with it. And the reason that you don't read about it is that if you get a copy of Daniel Estulin's most recent book, he was the writer of The True Story of the Bilderberger. There are several pages, chapter and verse, that show that every major news outlet in the English-speaking world is controlled by a Bilderberger. Thank you very much.